we'll start our commemoration of all things that have died and suffered as a result of human destruction. And I guess I'll start as the descendant of a human who gave his life for what he thought his country, but I would say it was a lesson, certainly to me, to work my entire life for peace, for life-giving. And I would also like to say I throw the flower in commemoration of what we lost as a family and what we continue to lose as a nation. Thank you. And could the next person come up?
Try and remember a group of people who tried to prevent World War II by fighting against Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco in Spain in the 30s. They lost because the democracies, our country included, our so-called democracy, was among those. Chapter 34, whom I'm commemorating, was one of the ones who thought that they would be able to stop Hitler in his tracks. And when it didn't work, they went on to volunteer in World War II, where many of them died. His name was Mo Fishman. Presente, Mo Fishman. And I also want to commemorate a more recent veteran who was part of Chapter 34 too, Bill Gilson, whom you all know, even though you might not have known Mo. But Bill was, he was changed by Veterans for Peace, by people like Dave Klein and Tarek Kauf, and many of you here too. Bob Keilback was one of the first vets to talk about him in Chapter 34. And he learned to be a peace warrior with us. Remember Bill Gilson. Bill Gilson, presente. Presente.
I'd like to commemorate 3 veterans from Jersey City, where I live, who are hidden casualties of the Vietnam War. Clarence Fitch, Dave Klein, and Jamie Vasquez, all presente.
America has a disease. Actually, America has many diseases, but one that is a root cause is this idea of American exceptionalism, this idea that America is somehow better than other countries, that is somehow in a position to dictate to other countries. That's a disease. That's a disease if you think that you're an American and you are any better than any other person on this planet. There's an even worse disease. That is human exceptionalism. You notice on that banner over here, move over a little bit, Ellen. It says, remember all living things. All living things. It is not just human beings that suffer from war. It is all our brethren, all the four-legged, all the winged birds that fly in the sky, all the sea creatures, and all those animals that crawl on the land. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to read a poem by Teresa Mae Chuck, who's a Vietnamese, who wrote this, a Vietnamese survivor of the war. This is called The Decade the Rainforest Died. The deer did not stop running. Leopards climbed into trees that could not hide them. The doe clanger and the white-cheeked gibbon cursed at the metal gods we flew, raining on them as they burned from napalm. elephants choked on the smoke of gunpowder and poison, their steps a strange rhythm as they tried to fly. The thunder of bombs echoed the steps of elephants. Tigers exploded as they stepped onto landmines in a forest covered with leaves, dead from Agent Orange, fallen trees, and decomposing bodies of animals and people. The earthworms were washed away in monsoons with soil that could no longer grab onto roots. The Javan rhinoceros and the wild water buffaloes that were still alive wandered aimlessly. Weary with M16s and AK-47s, we marched quietly and steadily, not knowing why we were killing each other. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is for all our relations. As the Lakotas say, Metekwi Wasan, all my relations. Presente.
This is for Frank Wagner, who came to this event and many other Veterans for Peace events for many, many, many years. Presente, Frank Wagner.
This is for Sergeant Matthew Fenton, who died in Iraq, and for Walter Soule, who died by suicide, Jeffrey Lucy, who died by suicide, all victims of the war based on lies.
This is for Kevin McGuire, a boyhood friend from Staten Island. He died in Vietnam, January '68. And for Casey Sheehan, who was killed in Iraq in 2004. Presente.
Was a fighter for peace all her life. She died last year. Her family had a tradition of fighting for peace and justice. Her parents were blacklisted in the 50s. She fought for political prisoners. She fought for union members. She fought for anybody who was a victim of social justice. And she did it joyously and with great commitment.
This is for Frank Dressner, who died at 24 in 1942 at Guadalcanal. He was the uncle of my wife, Elspeth, for Frank Dressner.
From Ghana, and his family lived in the Bronx in Ghana. He was sent to Fort Rucker in Alabama, which is near Montgomery, in January 10th, 2022. He was killed by his roommate, which was supposed to be safe. He was hit with a shovel. And a young white private who was 21 years old, and Abdul Latif, who was also 21 years old. So, presente.
This is in honor of Shireen Abu Akleh, who was a photographer in Palestine, and in honor of all the Palestinian people who are suffering every day in every way. Presente.
In Germany for a while, hung out with people that are on the base, and was just a lifelong activist against all social injustice. And I think Alice introduced us. We all met. We met at Desert Storm protests that we had in Washington Heights, and and that's how I got more active with Alice and John. And anyway, and this is, well, it's for John, it's for anyone who's suffered from war. There are trillions of us.
This is in memory of my childhood friend, Alan Keating, small town in Massachusetts, drafted to go to Vietnam, and lasted about 4 months before he died in battle. I also want to remember all the Vietnamese, the millions of Vietnamese who were murdered, killed, displaced from bombs, Agent Orange. This was a malicious war. It was not a war for freedom, certainly not a war for our freedom, and it was not a war for our democracy. Actually, it was a war against the Vietnamese democracy and their idea of freedom. So for all of those Vietnamese and my friend Alan, Presente.
Hi, this is for my friends Billy Blake and Paul Edge, who died in the Tet Offensive in 1968 at Hue. This is also for my best friend in high school, Jimmy Halloran, who blew his brains out shortly after coming back from Vietnam. It's also for the hundreds of thousands of people who have died in the past year in Ukraine, many of them under U.S. arms. It's shameful that we're still sending arms into that war. So, Presente.
This is for our friend Bernie Friedman, Korean War veteran who just died recently. He's probably in his 90s. Presente.
I want to thank the Veterans for Peace for having that great exhibit on My Lai massacre. So I think of those faces of the My Lai people. I want to send a flower to those people throughout Vietnam, but especially in that huddled group of women. I also would like to give my love out to all the Iranians who died when the US-backed Iraqis invaded their country, all the many thousands who gave their lives defending Iran. To them, we apologize and we think of you. And I also, for the first time, would like to say, I love you, Dad. My father, Dr. Tim Donovan, in 1968 put on a black armband and went to work, and all his co-workers moved away from him. So I want to thank you, Dad, for that courage. You kept that up. And my Uncle Tom Donovan, my godfather, who was a Marine, the same for all that thought. So thank you. Presente, Dr. Tim and Tom. God bless you.
This is in memory of my father, Saul Kupferman, who fought in the Battle of the Bulge, but also worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard and died many years later of suicide due to the asbestos poisoning that he faced and the degradation that he underwent for many years. And this is to all the American indigenous people who suffered from many of the wars, from the Revolutionary War on. Many, many were killed that we won't even acknowledge. Thank you. Presente.
This is for all who went to war not knowing the truth of killing and death and maiming and what was really going on, and whose hearts were transformed by the encounter with the evil of war and death, and came home and turned that experience of war into lives dedicated for peace and passion for justice, whom I'm honored to be with on this Memorial Day as an associate member of Veterans for Peace, but for all those around the world who turned their experience and encounter of the evil of war into a passion for peace and a belief in hope and the possibility of another way of being human with one another. And today, especially, I remember my good friend, Father John McNeil, who in prisoner of war in Nazi Germany, but will never forget his experience and came back home and said it was the courage and the spirit of people who led him to begin a movement for the LGBT community. And also today I'm thinking of people, I just thought of Phil Berrigan, who turned his experience of the horrors of war into a life dedicated for peace. May we have a little slimmer of his passion. That's all I would want, to rid our world of nuclear weapons and the threat of war. Presente.
For my great uncle, Aki Zolkowitz, injured in the World War I, and for my father, Albert J. Zolkowitz, disabled in World War II.
I know I spoke before, but it wouldn't be right if I did not remember one of our poet laureates and World War II veteran who was a great anti-war activist for years, ever since he got back from World War II in the infantry. And he was an original member of Veterans for Peace, the original Veterans for Peace in San Francisco. Jay Wenk, Presente.
I just want to tell all my Veterans for Peace folks, I missed you, I love you. I want to say you're just an inspiration, and I hope the world hears you, because I've heard you and I follow you and love you. On this day, I don't know, Frank Stearns keeps coming into my head, a wonderful veteran, and sadly, he was a victim of the COVID, I believe. And I'm grateful we're here today to remember him and to remember everyone, because that COVID is, there are no words. So God bless you, I thank you, and peace be with you, and may we find it somewhere along the way. Presente. Presente.
This flower is for Jordan Neely, who died in the war against the poor, the homeless, and the people of color in this country. He's strangled to death on the train by a man trained as a military weapon. And justice for Jordan Neely, he is, and may he rest in power.
Presente.
Presente.
This is for my father, Lieutenant Morris Stein, who went and trained with his platoon of communications GIs in the Second World War. He trained for about a year in this country, and then was sent to England for the Battle of the Bulge. And unlike Joel's father, who made it to the Battle of the Bulge, my father didn't make it to the Battle of the Bulge, and the reason was that practically all of his men were killed in a sinking of the troop ship Leopoldville, which was suppressed for decades after the Second World War. Like so many of the horrible things that happen in war are kept away from the civilians to help promote war. And my father, whom I lived with all of my life, he lived to a ripe old age. He didn't tell me, he didn't tell anybody. And shortly before he died, he told me about losing all of his men, or almost all of his men. He was on a different ship. His men went on the Leopoldville. And it's, you know, you might want to Google the Leopoldville. There are books written about it and everything, but it was suppressed. And he suffered all of his life, and I didn't even know it. I knew that there was something the matter, but I didn't know what. And this is for all of you and all of the survivors of war who have been suffering silently for all they've seen and all they've lost and all the people they've lost. Morris Stein, Presente.
I never joined the army in Iran. I was very lucky. My brother was in the army, and for the past many years, I have been admiring you people, the Veterans for Peace, which is total bravery, honesty, and basically acknowledging what wrong it was done by you, in your name, and by our government. And our government is still killing people around the world on a daily basis and supporting one of the most disgusting entities in the world. and who is killing Palestinians and destroying their lives for the past 75 years. I am honoring you people. It's in your name that I'm throwing this in. Presente.
Well, this all got me thinking about a lot of people I've known. I go to AA meetings. I had a friend there, Bob. We got pretty friendly. He was a veteran. And he told the story that everybody was lined up waiting to get shipped to Vietnam, all the privates. And a general came in and said, "Hey, Finch, didn't you all go to college? Well, the general in Wiesbaden needs a personal secretary. I'm shipping you there." And I guess it was a break for him. And anyway, and then once I was, we went out, a whole bunch of people went out for coffee, and I was trying to rally everybody at the table to get to this or that rally. And he says, "You activist types are a big pain in the ass." So, I don't know of any veterans.
This is for all those who have participated in war because or despite their so-called religious faith. We have so many people who believe that what they're doing is right. Their religious leaders have blessed the weapons, they've condoned the wars, and they've just desecrated faith. And it's all faiths. I happen to be Catholic. It's definitely the Christian faith. We have killed Jesus over and over and over again. And it's time that we stop. It's also for all those conscientious objectors who said no to war, and I will name one in particular, Ben Salmon, who was a conscientious objector in World War I and was imprisoned, abused, died, I'm sure, younger than he should have because of his mistreatment. He did not die in prison, but he died young, and his health was really pretty much ruined because of how badly he was treated. So for all those who got their faith right and refused to participate, and for all those that were duped into participating because of their faith. Presente.
Presente.
Hi, my name is Joe Hirsch. I've been a member of DVAW and Vets for Peace since May 4th, 1970. And the happiest moment was occurred when I stopped at a table and got peace tags with a peace symbol and the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. The most unhappy and the most horrible experience was when I was in language school. We went up to, I think it was San Jose, California, and visited a arms maker. The tour guide was Vietnamese. It was horrible. He showed us what they were making there. They were little planchettes, sharp as you could ever imagine, and said, "This is for our freedom." And I think at that moment, that's when I changed my thinking, or started to change my thinking about what I was doing. And I dedicate these flowers to all the brave people who died in wars, and also for people who are trying to put a stop to it. Thank you.
I want to remember all the people of Yemen who have suffered and died under the U.S. sanctions and the weapons that we have provided. Saudi Arabia, and even did it ourselves, killed children and many, many people. Wedding parties, we didn't discriminate, but all the people of Yemen who have suffered because of our country, the United States. It's shameful and it's unethical. and it's immoral.
Presente.